A cashier looked up and froze. The man she just told was $1 short was Keanu Reeves. The store held its breath as he turned toward the donation jar for children with cancer. What he did next didn't just shock everyone, it changed lives forever. But it all started with a missing dollar and one honest choice. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Amara Wells blinked back fatigue, her fingers moving on autopilot as she scanned a carton of eggs. It was Thursday evening, just after 8 p.m., and Dixon's Family Market was quiet enough to hear the creak of the freezer doors 2 aisles over. The air smelled like citrus floor cleaner and warm bread from the bakery in the back. The register beeped as she rang up the next item, her thoughts drifting far away. Amara was 20 years old and holding too much in her hands. Between nursing school, taking care of her little brother when her mom worked night shifts, and these long hours at Dixon's, she was barely staying afloat. Her shift started at noon, and she still had an hour left to go. The ache in her lower back reminded her she'd been standing all day. Her white Dixon's Market polo shirt clung to her from the heat, and her long dark curls were pulled into a high bun to keep the sweat off her neck. She glanced at the small pocket mirror taped beside the register. Her eyes looked tired, shadowed. She pressed a fingertip beneath one of them and sighed. Not the face of a girl who had dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse. But then again, that's why she applied for the Los Angeles Future Healers Scholarship. If she got it, she could finally drop one of her 2 jobs. Maybe sleep more than 4 hours. Maybe even breathe a little. $7.91, she murmured, handing change to an elderly man fumbling with his keys. He smiled with a grateful nod and shuffled out the door, his plastic bags rustling. The glass door squeaked shut behind him, and for a moment, the store stood still. Just Amara, her register, and a lull in customers. She allowed herself a second to lean against the counter, rolling one shoulder and then the other. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A text from her little brother. "Thank you. Oh, almost done? Hungry got you leftover lasagna?" She texted back quickly, smiling softly. Thank you was 12 and hated leftovers. But he wouldn't complain. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after their dad had walked out 3 years ago, leaving Amara and her mom to piece life back together. A rustling sound brought her attention back. A woman in her 60s was digging through a coin purse, counting out dimes, nickels, and pennies onto the counter. "Take your time, Mrs. Lang," Amara said gently. "No rush." She watched as the woman pushed forward 68 cents. The total was 79. "Looks like I'm short again," Mrs. Lang said with a sheepish chuckle. Amara reached into her tip jar without hesitation and dropped in the remaining 11 cents. "Got it covered. You always do," Mrs. Lang whispered, eyes soft with gratitude. "Your mama raised a good one." As the older woman left, Amara's smile lingered. But inside, she felt the weight returning. 11 cents today, a quarter yesterday. It all added up. But how could she not help when she knew what it felt like to come up short? Just then, the next customer stepped forward. No shopping cart, no basket, just 3 simple items in his hands. A protein bar, a bottle of water, a small pack of cough drops. Amara didn't look up right away. She reached for the scanner, blinking the weariness from her eyes. "Evening," she said, automatically. "Evening," the man replied in a quiet, unassuming voice. Something in the tone made her glance up, but only for a second. A hoodie, clean-shaven jaw. She couldn't see his eyes beneath the brim of his baseball cap. He looked like any tired traveler passing through. But there was something about the stillness in him. Like he wasn't in a hurry, like he had nowhere to be. She scanned the protein bar first. Beep. Then the water. Beep. Then the cough drops. "That'll be $8.23, she said softly, her fingers already hovering over the cash drawer button. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded $5 bill and a small handful of coins. Amara began counting, and that's when everything quietly changed. She counted the coins carefully, just like Mr. Dixon had trained her to do. $5, a quarter, 2 dimes, 3 nickels, and a few scattered pennies. She added again. 6.23, 7, 7.33, 7.58, $7.68. Amara paused. Her fingers hovered above the register keys. She looked up, this time fully, intending to explain gently that he was short, but the words caught in her throat. She stared at the man in front of her for a beat too long. The lines in his face were familiar. The quiet kindness, the stillness that wasn't awkward, but somehow calming. He stood there in a plain hoodie, his hands loose at his sides, not hurried, not flustered. His dark hair had streaks of gray, just visible beneath the edges of his cap. And then, her breath caught. She knew that face. She had seen it in movies, in interviews, on billboards when she was 12, sitting on the bus next to her dad as they passed Sunset Boulevard. Her heart thudded. Her mind raced. She blinked, then blinked again. Standing at a register, short exactly $1.55, was Keanu Reeves, the man who played Heroes, who gave away his movie salaries to cancer research, who rode the subway like any regular person, who once waited in the rain for hours to attend a fan's event. He was right here, in her checkout lane, and he didn't have enough money to pay for a protein bar, water, and cough drops. She looked around quickly to see if anyone else had noticed, but the store was still mostly quiet. One elderly couple shuffled down the soup aisle. The teenage bagger was chatting with another clerk by the dairy cooler. No one seemed to realize who was standing in front of her. "Sir," she began, her voice barely steady. I'm so sorry, but you're a little short," Keanu said gently, finishing her sentence. He glanced down at the coins between them and let out a soft breath of amusement. "Yeah, I left my wallet in the car, I think." He offered her a tired, almost apologetic smile. Her first instinct was to wave it off. It's just $1, maybe 2. She could take it from her tips, or not even mention it. Who would care? It was Keanu Reeves, but something in her paused. The sign taped beside her register caught her eye. All purchases must be paid in full, no exceptions. Mr. Dixon's handwriting was still faded but clear. It wasn't about rules, really. It was about fairness, about consistency. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Integrity is who you are when no one's watching, Amara. She looked back at Keanu, still waiting patiently, and with a quiet breath, she made her decision. Amara's voice was soft but steady. "I'm really sorry, sir, but you're $1.55 short." She braced herself for the moment, for the awkward silence, for the possible disbelief. But Keanu didn't scoff. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't act entitled. Instead, he nodded slowly and looked back down at the counter, as if double-checking the coins he had handed over. "Huh," he said with a small chuckle. "Guess I was." She offered a small smile. Part apology, part awe. "It happens." His eyes lifted to hers. Not annoyed, not embarrassed, just thoughtful. Then he glanced toward the entrance. "Mind if I run out to my car real quick? I think I left my wallet in the glove box." "Of course," she said, stepping aside slightly. "Take your time." He gave her a polite nod and turned to leave. That's when it started. The man behind him in line furrowed his brow. "Wait a second. Is that?" A young girl in a school hoodie gasped, clutching her mom's arm. "Mom, that's Keanu Reeves." A whisper spread down the aisle like wind catching dry leaves. Voices lowered, heads turned. Is it really him, Keanu? No way. The store's soft buzz began to hum with low excitement. The elderly couple near the soup cans craned their necks. One of the employees by the dairy dropped his carton of yogurt, eyes wide. Amara stood frozen for a moment. She'd been the first to know. The first to speak to him without fanfare, just as a customer, just as another person. And he hadn't made a scene. He hadn't demanded anything. He'd simply said he left his wallet in the car. But just as he reached the door, something on the counter caught his eye. He stopped, took a step back. It was a small glass jar, half filled with wrinkled dollar bills, loose change, and a few folded $5 notes. A simple handwritten label was taped to the front in purple marker. Pasadena Children's Care Unit, donations appreciated. And beside the words was a faded photo of a little boy, maybe 6 years old, bald, beaming, holding a teddy bear in a hospital gown. Keanu stared at the jar for a long time. Amara followed his gaze. Her heart began to beat faster. He didn't say anything, didn't move, but something in the air shifted, something quiet and powerful. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. She could only watch. Because she didn't know it yet, but in that silent pause, in that one small moment where a man stopped to look at a dusty donation jar, everything was about to change. Amara stood behind the counter, her hand still lightly resting on the edge of the register. She watched as the tall man in the hoodie, Keanu Reeves, continued to gaze at the small donation jar like it had stopped time. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed faintly. The quiet of the store felt heavier now, thicker, like something was holding its breath. Keanu didn't reach for the door again. He turned back toward her instead. "How much did you say it was again?" he asked, his voice soft. She cleared her throat. $8.23, sir." He looked down at the handful of change he had left on the counter. Without touching it, he recounted it with his eyes. $7.23, he murmured. "I guess I really am short." Amara nodded gently. "Just about $1.55, actually." Her heart was beating too fast. She tried to stay calm, to focus on what she'd been taught, what she always did. Everyone paid the full amount. Everyone. But this wasn't everyone. This was Keanu Reeves. He looked at her now with a half smile, a flicker of humility that somehow made him seem even more human. Not a celebrity, not a movie star, just a man out for something simple to get him through the evening. "I think my wallet's in the car," he said again, almost to himself. Then his eyes drifted back to the jar beside the register, the one with Eli's photo on it, the one that hadn't seen more than a few dollars a day in weeks. Amara followed his gaze. "That's for the children's unit," she explained, her voice quiet. "Pasadena General. My little brother was treated there last year. He's in remission now." Keanu didn't speak right away. He just kept looking at the photo, the boy's smile, the faded paper hearts glued to the front of the jar by local school kids. It was just a jar. But in that moment, it became something more. "What's his name?" he asked. "Tyson," Amara replied. "We call him Thank You. He's 12 now. Broke his arm, falling off his bike last summer. And the doctors found something in the x-ray. Early stage lymphoma." Keanu turned toward her fully now. His face held no trace of celebrity ego, just sincerity. "He okay now?" She nodded, emotion tightening her chest. "Yeah, thanks to that place." Keanu looked down at the change again, then to the jar, then, finally, to Amara. And that was the moment she knew she couldn't wave it off. Not for a celebrity, not even for Keanu Reeves. "Sir," she said again, trying to keep her voice kind but firm. "I really can't finish the transaction unless it's fully paid. I'm sorry." Keanu's eyes lingered on her for a moment, then dropped back to the change between them. He didn't argue, didn't protest. He simply nodded again, slowly. "You're just doing your job," he said. Amara exhaled, her relief mixed with unease. The line had grown. 3 people now waited behind him, one of them shifting impatiently. A woman in business attire checked her watch, sighed, then whispered to her teenage daughter, who turned to glance at Amara with an annoyed expression. "I'll be right back," Keanu said, gesturing toward the parking lot. Amara nodded, grateful for how calmly he handled it. Still, she couldn't stop the worry from rising in her chest. What if someone caught it on video? What if she became the girl who told Keanu Reeves he was short $1? Would she be ridiculed, laughed at online? She swallowed the nerves and turned to the next customer. An older man with a basket of canned soup and cat food stepped up, but even he couldn't help but glance over his shoulder at the door Keanu had just walked through. "You know who that was, right?" he whispered. Amara offered a small nod. "Yeah, I figured it out." He chuckled. "Never thought I'd see John Wick buying cough drops." She gave a nervous laugh but kept scanning. "Me neither." As she handed the man his change and moved to the next person, something flickered at the edge of the crates. Her vision. Keanu hadn't left the store. He was standing just off to the side now, beside a display of peanut butter and crackers, facing the donation jar again. He didn't say a word. He just stood there. The next customer hesitated. Amara followed their gaze. Keanu's posture was still and composed, but his eyes were locked on the photo of Eli, the little boy with the hospital gown and the teddy bear. She watched the way his jaw tensed, how his shoulders shifted, just barely. Amara wanted to say something, but for once, she didn't know what. The donation jar had been there so long, most people stopped noticing it. She'd emptied it last week and rolled the coins herself, just under $19, a drop in the bucket for a hospital unit, but still every bit counted. She finished ringing up the next two customers without looking back, but she could feel the atmosphere had shifted. A couple whispered near the gum display. A stock clerk stood frozen near the frozen pizzas, holding a box but not moving. Everyone in the store, whether they recognized him or not, seemed to sense that something unusual was happening. Keanu stepped forward again, eyes still on the jar. Then he looked back at Amara. He took a breath, like someone settling into a decision before they speak. Then his voice, soft and low, cut through the stillness. "What's the hospital called again?" he asked. Amara blinked. "Pasadena Children's Care Unit." He nodded. "Do they have a donation link?" "Yes, I think so. Their website does." Keanu reached into his back pocket and pulled out a phone. It was an older model, scuffed along the edges. Nothing flashy. No diamond-studded case or assistant trailing behind him. Just a man with a phone, typing quietly. The sound of taps echoed faintly against the shelves. The buzz of the store had dropped to a murmur. Not because someone had made an announcement, but because something was happening, and people could feel it. Amara glanced at the woman who'd sighed earlier. She wasn't annoyed anymore. She was watching closely, one hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. Keanu held up the phone, turned slightly so only Amara could see. On the screen was a confirmation page. A transfer, $50,000 to Pasadena Children's Hospital Foundation. Her breath caught. Her knees felt a little weak. But Keanu wasn't done. He looked up at the rest of the store, then turned slightly toward the other customers, his voice calm but clear enough to carry. "If anyone wants to help," he said, "I'll match every single dollar donated here in the next 5 minutes by 10,000. Gasps echoed across the produce section. The teenage bagger dropped his notepad. A woman near the cereal aisle clapped her hand over her mouth. Amara's jaw parted, her lips barely able to form words. 10,000. Keanu gave the smallest nod, per dollar. She looked at the jar, at the small photo of Eli, at the coins and bills already inside, then back at him. A few customers turned and started walking toward the register. One pulled out a few singles. Another dumped her change purse. "Start a timer," Keanu said softly, returning his eyes to Amara. She fumbled for her phone. Her hands trembled as she opened the clock app and set the countdown. 5 minutes, she whispered, "starting now." The hum of carts, the rustle of bags, the footsteps, everything grew louder, faster, filled with purpose. But at the center of it all stood Amara, stunned. The moment was real. The man was real. And it had all started because she'd told Keanu Reeves he was short by $1. The moment Amara hit start on the timer, something changed in the store. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but something rippled. The older man near the soup can slowly turned around, holding his shopping basket tight against his chest like he was watching history unfold. The teenage girl who had been slouching behind her mom straightened up and grabbed her phone. Across the store, the bagger's mouth dropped open as he fumbled to scoop up a pack of gum he'd dropped, too distracted by the words he had just heard. $1 multiplied by 10,000. People didn't understand at first. Not fully. But they understood it was real. Amara stood at the register, still gripping her phone, watching the timer tick down from 4:59. Her hands were shaking. Not out of fear, but from the weight of it all. She'd never seen anything like this. Not in the store, not in her life. Keanu didn't call for attention. He didn't wave his arms. But somehow, the store's energy turned toward him. As if everyone instinctively knew this moment was worth pausing for. A young woman near the bread aisle nudged her boyfriend. "Is that really him?" He leaned forward and squinted. "That's Keanu. I swear, it island." Mr. Dixon appeared from the back office, squinting through his reading glasses. His usual brisk steps slowed as he took in the scene. He didn't speak. He just stopped near the coffee stand and watched. A mother pushing a stroller approached the front. She looked at Amara and said quietly, "Can we donate here? Is this real?" Amara nodded. "Yes, anything you give in the next 5 minutes is being multiplied by 10,000. The woman's eyes went wide. She dug into her purse, pulled out a $10 bill, and placed it gently into the jar. A few coins clinked against the glass. Keanu's eyes remained fixed on the jar, not on the crowd, not on the whispers, just the jar. He leaned closer, reading the small handwritten sign taped to the front. Donations go to kids undergoing cancer treatment. Pasadena Children's Care Unit. The marker ink had smudged slightly where the paper had gotten damp last week during a cleaning shift, but the letters were still clear. Below the message, a child's drawing of a rainbow colored in crayon curved over the photo. Amara watched as Keanu's eyes landed on the picture. A little boy, maybe 6, bald, grinning with a gap-toothed smile. One arm hugged a stuffed elephant. The other held up a paper heart with the word brave written in blue marker. Keanu's face didn't change much, but something in his posture shifted, just barely. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a crumpled $1 bill. Then, quietly, he looked at Amara. Keanu placed the dollar in Amara's hand without saying a word. It was the same amount he'd been missing moments ago, but now it meant something entirely different. It wasn't a payment, it was a choice. Amara stared at the bill in her palm, speechless. This wasn't just a transaction anymore. As if on cue, the front doors whooshed open. A father stepped inside holding his daughter's hand, both of them breathless, like they'd run from the parking lot. He looked around quickly, then spotted the crowd forming near the front. "Did we miss it? Did we miss it?" he asked. "Is the donation thing still happening?" "You've got 3.5 minutes," someone called out from the back. Without hesitation, the man pulled a 20 from his wallet, handed it to his daughter, and whispered, "Go." The girl, maybe 8 or 9, darted forward and dropped the bill into the jar with a grin. Next came a teenager in a school uniform, her backpack slung low over one shoulder. She passed her phone to her friend and jogged forward with a $10 bill, her face bright with awe. Keanu stood back, letting it unfold. He didn't direct, he didn't pose, he didn't speak again. He just watched. From the bakery aisle, a woman ran out, holding a jar of quarters from the break room. She explained breathlessly to Amara, "I'm the assistant baker. We keep this for vending machine snacks." She poured the whole thing in. The clinking of coins was almost musical. Another customer stepped forward with 2 $5 bills. He wore a mechanic's shirt with oil stains across the chest. "My nephew's in the children's hospital up in Burbank," he said. "They saved his life last year. I wish I had more." Keanu heard it and turned his head slightly, making eye contact with the man. He didn't say anything, but the small nod he gave said more than enough. Mr. Dixon finally made his way behind the register. His voice was low when he leaned toward Amara. "Did he really say 10,000 per dollar?" he asked. She nodded. "Can he even do that?" "He already did," she replied. 50,000 just a few minutes ago. He showed me. "Mister, Dixon rubbed the back of his neck and looked around at the store that had suddenly transformed into something unrecognizable. A grocery store turned into a beating heart. Customers who were strangers only moments before were talking, nodding, encouraging each other. Bags and baskets sat abandoned as people joined the growing line to give what they could. Amara checked the timer on her phone again. 2 minutes, 20 seconds left, and still more people were coming. Near the checkout lane, a young man in his 20s hesitated. He wore a faded hoodie, and his hands were buried deep in his pockets. He looked like he didn't have much. He stepped forward anyway, slowly pulling out a few coins, mostly nickels and pennies. "I don't have a lot," he murmured, "but my brother had leukemia. We used to collect cans just to afford gas for the hospital visits." He looked at Keanu with tired eyes. "Thank you." Keanu didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He simply reached into the shopping basket still sitting on the counter, grabbed the Cald, protein bar, and the cough drops, and placed them aside. He then picked up the bottle of water, unscrewed the cap, and offered it to the young man. "Stay hydrated," he said gently. The man blinked, stunned. Then he accepted the bottle like it was gold. There were now fewer than 60 seconds left. Amara's heart was pounding in her ears. She wasn't even sure why. It wasn't fear or stress. It was something else, something electric, like being part of a moment that didn't belong to one person, but somehow belonged to everyone in the room. The jar was nearly full, bills sticking out of the top, coins stacked along the base. An older woman stepped forward with a crisp 20. She placed it in the jar, then turned to Amara and asked quietly, "Who's the little boy in the picture?" Amara hesitated, then smiled. "His name is Eli. He's 6. His mom shops here sometimes. We put the jar up for him after the last fundraiser ended." The woman nodded and pressed her hand against her chest. "He reminds me of my grandson. Thank you for keeping the jar here." The timer buzzed softly. Amara hit stop. Then, silence. Not a word, not a shuffle, just a stillness that wrapped around everyone like a warm blanket. Keanu stepped forward and placed a hand gently on the side of the jar. Then he looked up, scanning the room slowly, his eyes meeting face after face, people of all ages, all backgrounds, bound by this strange, beautiful moment. He nodded, and that was it. No speech, no cameras, no announcement, just a quiet, unspoken thank you. The crowd didn't clap. It didn't feel right. Instead, people just smiled at each other, some with tears in their eyes, and began to return to their carts, their kids, their lives. But none of them would ever forget that 5-minute pause. And it all started with one missing dollar. Amara gently lifted the donation jar and placed it back on the counter, now heavier with kindness than it had ever been. Keanu looked at it, thoughtfully, then turned to her and asked in a calm, quiet voice, "How much do you think is in there?" She shrugged, still catching her breath from what had just happened. "Maybe $30? We collect throughout the year. Sometimes people drop in change, sometimes a bill or two. Last month, someone gave us a 50, and we all almost cried." Keanu raised his eyebrows. $30, that's it?" She nodded. "We're a small store. Most people around here are working class, paycheck to paycheck, but every little bit helps." He gave a soft hum of acknowledgement and pulled out his phone. "What's the full name of the unit this goes to?" he asked. Amara blinked. "You mean the hospital?" "Yes, the department, the one Eli's in." She fumbled under the counter and pulled out the folder with the flyer they kept for reference. It had the hospital name, the room number for donations, and the unit listed clearly at the top, Pasadena Children's Oncology and Palliative Care Unit. Keanu read it carefully, his fingers poised over his phone. Then, without warning, he raised his voice just loud enough to cut through the store. "Excuse me, everyone." People froze. A mother pushing a cart full of cereal stopped mid-step. The young man with the oil-stained shirt who just donated turned on his heel. Even Mr. Dixon stopped unboxing canned goods in aisle 3. Keanu stood next to the register now, holding his phone. "I don't usually do this," he said, his tone measured but warm. "But what I saw here, moved me. The room was still. He continued, "That donation jar right here on this counter is for children going through cancer treatment. Most people walk past it. Some give what they can. Tonight, I saw strangers stepping up for a little boy they've never met." He paused, then glanced around. "I want to do something in return. Something simple." The silence deepened. Keanu took a small step closer to the counter and placed his phone face up so the screen was visible. "I've just transferred $50,000 to the Pasadena Children's Oncology Unit." A gasp rolled through the store. He let the moment settle before he added, "But I'm not done." He looked at Amara, then slowly turned his attention back to the growing group of customers. "For the next 5 minutes," he said clearly, "anyone who donates anything, pennies, dollars, whatever you can, I will multiply the total by 10,000. The store went dead quiet. Amara's lips parted. Mr. Dixon leaned against the wall, speechless. Keanu glanced down at his phone, tapped the stopwatch, and said softly, 5 minutes starts now. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the store had frozen in time again, just like it had minutes earlier when Amara first told the stranger he was $1 short. But this time, it wasn't tension, it was disbelief. Keanu Reeves, the man they had just seen blending into the background, had dropped a bombshell that left them speechless. Amara's heart thudded. She wasn't sure if she'd heard him correctly. $50,000? Multiply everything by 10,000? Her hands trembled slightly as she looked down at the donation jar, now filled with scattered bills and coins. Then, finally, something shifted. The first to move was an elderly woman who had been waiting by the bread aisle. She clutched her purse to her chest, walked slowly toward the counter, and pulled out a $5 bill. Her fingers trembled as she slid it into the jar. She didn't say a word. She just nodded to Keanu and stepped aside. Next came a teenage boy, wearing a local high school football hoodie. He jogged over from the energy drink fridge, holding a crumpled dollar in his hand. "I was saving this for a soda," he mumbled, eyes lowered. "But this feels more important." He dropped it into the jar and stepped back. Then the dam broke. A father with 2 young kids fished coins from his pockets and handed each child a quarter to place into the jar. A delivery driver, still wearing his gloves and high-vis vest, walked up and put in a 10, followed by another 10. He didn't speak, he just tipped his cap. A couple in their 30s emptied their wallets. A teenage girl pulled out a bracelet and asked if she could trade it for cash to donate. Mr. Dixon himself walked out from behind the counter, grabbed the tip jar from the back office, and dumped its entire contents, nearly $80, into the donation jar with a proud thud. Amara could barely keep up. She had never seen anything like it. Not during Christmas drives, not during charity nights, not even during the time the store rallied around a family after a house fire. This was different. This was raw. And it all stemmed from one moment, one man, one promise. Keanu stood calmly beside her, watching each donation with quiet focus. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't smiling for attention. In fact, he looked a little overwhelmed himself. The stopwatch ticked on, 4 minutes left. A middle-aged man in a business suit walked straight from the checkout lane and dropped in a 20 without even buying anything. Then he turned to Keanu. "My sister's in remission," he said. That unit helped her walk again. Keanu placed a hand over his heart. The man nodded and left. People weren't just donating, they were uniting. In 5 minutes, the store had turned into something sacred. A kind of shared space of hope, memory, and purpose. And the clock was still ticking. 3 minutes left. Amara could hardly believe her eyes. The donation jar was nearly overflowing now. People were handing over cash and change faster than she could register. Even kids who'd come in with pocket money for candy were donating. One little girl pulled out 3 shiny nickels and said it was her ice cream money, but she wanted to give it to the bald kids. Keanu crouched down beside her, met her eyes, and said gently, "They're going to love that." Her mother, eyes filled with emotion, whispered thank you to both Keanu and Amara as they stepped aside. A man in work boots came in straight from the parking lot, having heard the commotion from outside. He asked, "Is it true?" Keanu Reeves is donating to a cancer hospital? Amara nodded. He pulled out two 20s and added, I lost my nephew last year. I'll never forget that floor. Amara felt tears sting the edges of her eyes, but she blinked them away. She was the cashier. She needed to stay composed. Still, something about this moment was tearing past her usual strength. Keanu glanced at the clock on his phone. 2 minutes. A young woman who'd been quietly filming on her phone whispered, He's really doing it. This isn't just a celebrity stunt. He's serious. At that, Keanu turned and addressed the crowd again, this time softer. This isn't about me, he said. It's about remembering that integrity still matters, that giving, even when it's small, can change everything. Then, he nodded at the jar. You're doing that. Every one of you. The store fell into a respectful hush. 60 seconds left. A teenager burst in through the door holding an envelope. My mom runs a salon next door, she said breathlessly. She told me to bring this. It's what we made in tips today. She dropped it in and wiped her hands on her apron. Amara glanced at Keanu, unsure what to say. He just smiled. Then the final seconds began to count down. 10, 9, 8. People clapped. Some held their hands over their hearts. Others just stared in quiet disbelief. When the timer hit 0, Keanu tapped his phone again and took a deep breath. All right, he said softly, let's do some math. Amara and Mr. Dixon helped him carefully count the donations on a clean counter surface. The total came to $184.72. Keanu didn't hesitate. He pulled up his banking app and showed it again. One transfer, one line, $1,847,200, sent directly to the Pasadena Children's Oncology and Palliative Care Unit. Gasps echoed through the store. Someone clapped, then another, and then the whole store erupted in stunned, joyful applause. And just like that, a routine Thursday night became a moment that no one inside that market would ever forget. It started like a wave, slow at first, then unstoppable. The applause had barely faded when someone shouted from the back of the store, Wait, is it too late to donate? Amara, still catching her breath behind the counter, looked to Keanu. He nodded. Never too late for kindness. That was all it took. People who had been halfway to their cars turned around and came back through the automatic doors. The chime rang again and again as customers poured back in some holding bills in their hands, others clutching coin jars from their dashboards. A young teenage boy, maybe 14, approached the register with a shy expression. He had 2 crumpled dollar bills in his palm and a heavy-looking backpack over his shoulder. Without a word, he dropped the bills into the jar and quickly turned to leave. Keanu gently stopped him with a hand on the shoulder. Thank you, he said quietly. The boy froze, then gave the smallest nod and walked out, eyes wide and shining. Amara felt something swell in her chest, the kind of warmth that feels like hope. Next came a man in jeans and a firefighter's t-shirt. Off-duty, judging by the way he carried himself, tired but proud. He stepped forward and opened his wallet. Without checking the amount, he pulled out every single bill and placed them into the jar. Then he looked around at the others and added, Let's make this count, folks. Behind him, Mrs. Kim from the flower shop next door came rushing in, panting slightly and still wearing her gardening gloves. Her apron was dusted with pollen and bits of greenery. I saw the live stream, she said breathlessly, waving her phone. Is it true? Did he really say $10,000 per dollar? Amara nodded, still stunned. Mrs. Kim reached into her bag and pulled out a plain white envelope. It was weathered at the edges, sealed with a piece of faded pink tape. This was my emergency savings, she said, her voice trembling. But I know what cancer does to a family. My sister didn't make it. She placed the envelope gently beside the jar and stepped back. Let this go to someone who still has a chance. No one spoke, but several people wiped their eyes. Mr. Dixon emerged from the back room holding an empty coffee pot. We need more containers, he said. A young manager followed behind him with an oversized Tupperware container still labeled Lost and Found. They dumped out its contents, scarves, sunglasses, an old toy dinosaur, and set it beside the counter. Another customer ran back to her car and returned with a Ziploc bag of coins she'd been collecting for toll booths. It didn't matter how small or how big the donation was. The energy had shifted. People weren't just giving money, they were giving pieces of their hearts. And the jar that had once held $30 was now joined by bins and bowls filled with compassion. A woman in scrubs entered next, holding her car keys in one hand and a half-finished smoothie in the other. She looked like she'd just come off a long shift at Huntington Hospital. Without saying a word, she walked straight to the donation table, pulled a $20 bill from her wallet, and dropped it in the Tupperware container. She paused, looked at the photo of Eli taped to the jar, then whispered something no one could hear before turning to leave. From the other side of the store, a pair of college students pushed through the crowd. One of them was on FaceTime, showing his friend the commotion. The other clutched a coin pouch and dumped it in, laughing nervously. "This is the craziest Thursday night I've ever had," he muttered. Someone near the back handed over a $5 bill, followed by a quiet older gentleman in a Dodgers cap who reached into his coat and placed a $100 bill into the glass coffee pot. He didn't say a word, just nodded to Keanu as if he knew him. Even the employees began pulling out their wallets. Omar, the shy night stalker, added a few wrinkled singles and a $5. He'd been saving for a bus pass, but when he saw what was happening, he couldn't stand still. This is how the world should be," he said, barely above a whisper. A mother holding a fussy baby walked up with her teenage daughter. The daughter opened her small Hello Kitty purse and poured out what looked like quarters and nickels, maybe $2 total. Keanu knelt beside her, smiled, and gave her a small fist bump. "You just turned $2 into $20,000, he said gently. The girl lit up. The countdown was still ticking on Keanu's phone, but no one was looking at the clock. Not anymore. Mrs. Kim returned again, this time with a tray of small roses from her shop. She began handing them out to anyone who donated, pressing the blooms into their hands like blessings. "Take this," she said to an elderly woman. "For love, for luck." Someone started a quiet chant near the back. "For Eli, for Eli." Others joined in. "For Eli, for Eli." The sound built, not loud, but steady, like a heartbeat. By now, there were so many containers on the counter that Amara had to clear off the impulse buy rack to make room. Gum packs and candy bars were pushed aside. Kindness took priority. She didn't notice she was crying until someone handed her a tissue. The firefighter had stayed nearby. "You okay?" Amara nodded, pressing the tissue to her cheek. I've worked here for 3 years. I've never seen anything like this." The firefighter looked toward Keanu, who was helping someone fold a paper bill into the jar. "Neither have I." The final minute on Keanu's phone began counting down. Amara glanced at it, heart racing not from stress, but from something deeper. Hope. Unity. This was a kind of magic she didn't know existed in a place like this. With 30 seconds left, the store door swung open again. A delivery driver rushed in wearing a reflective vest and a headset still in his ear. "I saw the clip online. Is it still happening?" Amara nodded and pointed toward the growing mountain of containers. Without hesitation, the driver pulled out a wad of tip money and dropped it in. Then, awkwardly but earnestly, he added, "That kid's smile. It reminded me of my nephew." 10 seconds left. A boy with Down syndrome who had been quietly watching from the dairy aisle came forward, holding a tiny plastic piggy bank shaped like a dinosaur. He offered it to Amara. "This is for the boy in the picture," he said. Everyone stepped aside for him. Amara gently took the bank and placed it at the very top of the Tupperware stack, where the sunlight from the front windows could touch it. 5 seconds. Keanu stepped back, hands behind his back, letting the moment breathe. 3, 2, 1. The phone buzzed. Keanu looked up. "That's time." He tapped a few buttons, then held up the screen. It showed a second wire transfer, this one for $137,000. The crowd gasped, even louder than before. "That's what you raised," he said. And I meant what I said. I'll multiply it." The room went silent. Then someone laughed through their tears. Amara's hands were shaking as she leaned on the counter. "That's over $1 million, she whispered. "We just raised over $1 million. Keanu walked to the edge of the register, gently picked up the photo of Eli, and looked at it closely. Then he said something soft, something no one forgot. "This little boy, he's a warrior. Let's help him win." That line became the story's heartbeat. Someone printed it on shirts. Someone else posted it online with the video clip of Keanu speaking, and within an hour, it had gone viral. But inside the store, none of that mattered yet. People were hugging. Strangers were exchanging names. A mother and daughter took a photo with Mrs. Kim, still holding their roses. Omar wiped down the register with slow, reverent hands. The light outside had shifted. Sunset painted the floor in warm gold. Amara finally sat down on the stool behind the counter, staring at the overflowing containers of cash, change, and love. The store had never been busier, but somehow it had never felt so peaceful. The surge of activity had begun to quiet. The timer had long run out, yet people were still lingering, reluctant to leave the moment behind. A sacred kind of stillness settled over the store, like everyone knew something bigger than them had just happened and they didn't want to break the spell. Amara was standing behind the counter, still stunned, when she saw someone slowly approaching from the store's automatic doors. A frail figure emerged, leaning on a wooden cane with a soft rubber tip that squeaked slightly every other step. It was Lorraine Sanchez, 82 years old. Always wore a lavender cardigan, no matter the weather. Lived alone in the small yellow house behind the market, the one with wind chimes that sang even in the softest breeze. Lorraine walked with the kind of grace only time can teach, a balance between pain and pride. She moved slowly but deliberately toward the donation pile, her expression unreadable. In her other hand, she clutched a worn floral coin purse, the kind that snapped open with a metal clasp and had likely been hers for decades. When she reached the counter, she paused, looked at the tower of containers overflowing with generosity, and then looked up at Amara. Without a word, she opened her purse and turned it upside down. A few coins clinked softly into the pile, maybe $1 and some change. That was it. Amara blinked, then leaned closer. "Mrs. Sanchez, wait, that's for your groceries. Didn't you come in for oatmeal and eggs? That's all you had?" Lorraine smiled gently, folding her empty purse shut with care. "I know what I came in for, dear, but some things," she said, resting her cane against the counter, "are worth more than dinner." Amara felt her throat tighten. Lorraine looked down at the little photo of Eli that was still tucked behind the jar, now damp at the edges from sweat and teardrops and fingerprints. Her voice softened. "I had a son once. He didn't make it past 10. That smile on that boy's face, it brought him back to me, just for a second." Keanu had been standing a few feet away, speaking quietly with a young couple, but he turned the moment he heard Lorraine's words. Their eyes met across the space. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to, but his jaw clenched gently, and his eyes, already glassy from everything that had unfolded, shimmered just a little more. It was that kind of silence, the respectful kind. The kind that says, "I hear you," without a single syllable. Lorraine smiled again and picked up her cane. With a final look at the mountain of donations, she turned and began her walk back toward the exit. Her steps were slow but steady. Her back was straighter than before. No one clapped. No one filmed. But every soul in that store knew they'd just witnessed something sacred. As Lorraine disappeared through the automatic doors, Amara stood frozen behind the counter. Her eyes were still locked on the space where the elderly woman had stood, like a part of her hadn't fully returned to the moment. Around her, even the store's usual hum felt different, slower, quieter. Something unexplainable had just happened. One of the assistant managers, Carlos, walked over with another donation box in his hands, but even he paused, glancing toward the door as if expecting Lorraine to return. "That woman," he whispered. "I see her here every Thursday. Never buys more than $10 worth of food, and she just gave everything." Amara nodded slowly. Her hands were resting on the counter, fingers trembling just slightly. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, catching the gleam of the overflowing containers now surrounding the donation jar. She glanced toward Keanu, expecting him to have stepped away or said something to acknowledge the gesture, but he hadn't moved. He was still standing exactly where he'd been when their eyes met. One hand tucked into his jacket pocket, the other resting lightly on the counter. His eyes were fixed on the small pile of coins Lorraine had dropped into the original glass jar, the one that had started it all. Just a few coins, but they sat like gold in a crown. "Are you okay?" Amara asked softly. Keanu blinked, the spell breaking just slightly. He gave a quiet nod, then turned his gaze back to her. "She gave more than all of us," he said. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't said for applause. They were just true, pure truth, offered in the way Keanu often did, in the quietest tone with the loudest weight. Amara swallowed. Her heart was still racing, and yet something about Lorraine's gesture had settled her too. It reminded her of why she worked those long shifts, why she studied through exhaustion, why she looked at photos like Eli's and held her breath. Because even when you feel like you have nothing left, there's always a moment to give. There was movement near the front door again. This time it wasn't Lorraine. It was a group of teenagers who had been sitting on the curb earlier, skateboards tucked under their arms. One of them, a tall boy with scruffy hair and a chipped tooth, walked up to the counter. He pulled out 2 crumpled singles and dropped them into one of the coffee pots being used for donations. He didn't say a word, just looked at Amara, nodded, and walked out again. Keanu watched him go, then looked back at the growing pile of kindness. It wasn't just money anymore. It was every quiet act, every memory, every sacrifice. And now, a legacy was forming, coin by coin. As Amara reached to straighten the jar, her hand brushed against the worn edge of Lorraine's little coin purse, now resting beside it. The faded stitching along the side caught her eye. There was a tiny heart embroidered in red thread, nearly rubbed away with time. It must have been handmade, possibly decades ago. Just another quiet piece of the woman's life that now sat beside a wave of generosity none of them could have predicted. Amara turned to the side and opened the register drawer. Without overthinking it, she took out a $10 bill, enough to replace what Lorraine had likely planned to spend. She slid it discreetly into an envelope and tucked it under the counter. "I'll walk it over to her apartment later," she whispered. Keanu heard her, but didn't say anything. His eyes remained thoughtful, fixed on the collection of containers that now held more than anyone had expected. The firefighter's wallet, the florist's envelope, the teenager's crumpled dollars. And at the center of it all, a few faded coins from an old woman who had no reason to give, but gave anyway. "I wish the world could see this," Amara said suddenly. Keanu turned toward her. His expression was still soft, but there was a glint in his eyes, something stirred. He nodded slowly. It just did. She didn't understand at first. But then he lifted his phone, unlocked it, and showed her the screen. A live stream had been running the whole time. The feed was titled simply, "A Moment of Kindness" in Pasadena. It already had over 70,000 viewers watching in real time. Thousands of comments flowed beneath it, people from across the country reacting with disbelief, gratitude, and tears. Amara's jaw dropped. "You were recording?" Keanu nodded. Not to shame anyone, just to show the world something real. Then he pointed to a comment that had just flashed across the screen. "I just donated $100 to the Pasadena Children's Care Unit. Bless that old woman." Another one appeared. "Lorraine is the kind of hero we forget to celebrate." Amara felt her eyes burn. Her hand went to her mouth. "She doesn't even have a computer," she whispered. "She'll never know what she started." Keanu smiled faintly. "Yes, she will." He gently tapped his phone, saved the video, and sent it to a contact. Then he pulled a notepad from his back pocket and jotted something down. "I'll make sure the hospital shows her. She should see the world honoring her." And with that, the ripple of kindness Lorraine had begun with her last few coins, had stretched far beyond the walls of Dixon's market. It had become something bigger, something living. The buzz in Dixon's family market hadn't settled. If anything, it had intensified. People milled about in every direction, but their movements had purpose, not chaos. There was urgency in the air, hope woven into every footstep, every glance, every hand reaching into a pocket or purse. Then, a teenage boy near the back of the store raised his phone above his head. His voice cut through the low hum of conversations. 4 minutes and 50 seconds. The countdown had begun. The race against time electrified the moment. It wasn't panic. It was passion. Near the door, a young mother with 2 kids in tow jogged in, still wearing her pajamas under a long coat. She carried a large pink piggy bank in her arms. Her sons, around 6 and 8 years old, clutched smaller versions, one shaped like a race car, the other like a dinosaur. They stepped carefully to the front, eyes wide as they spotted the containers overflowing on the counter. Amara leaned forward to greet them. "Would you like to help the kids in the hospital?" The boys nodded eagerly. The mother smiled but looked uncertain for a moment. Then she knelt beside them, whispering something in their ears. Both boys unscrewed the bottoms of their piggy banks and tipped them over. Coins of every size spilled into the nearest coffee pot container. Quarters clinked. Pennies rolled. A few bills fluttered down like leaves. 3 minutes and 40 seconds! The teen called again, now pacing with excitement. A UPS truck screeched slightly as it stopped outside. The driver, a man in his 30s wearing shorts despite the night chill, jogged in. He was still wearing his brown cap and carried a small stack of packages. "What's going on?" he asked, looking around. "Donation drive. 5 minutes. Keanu Reeves is matching it all times 10,000, someone shouted. The driver blinked. "You're joking." Amara pointed to the man in the hoodie. "No joke." The UPS driver gave Keanu a stunned look, then burst out laughing not from disbelief, but joy. He jogged back to his truck, pulled out his wallet, and came back in with a handful of bills. "I was going to use this for dinner," he said, tossing in the cash. "But this matters more." Keanu nodded once, offering a quiet smile, but said nothing. 3 minutes left, the teen shouted. Back near the front counter, a familiar figure emerged from the back office. Mr. Dixon, the store owner, an older man in suspenders and glasses, approached the commotion with a curious expression. He looked toward Amara, who gave a quick explanation. "People are donating like crazy for the children's hospital. Keanu said he'd match it all." Mr. Dixon's brows lifted. He looked toward the jar, then toward Keanu. Without a word, he turned, walked back to the register, popped it open, and removed the float, the night's backup cash that kept the drawer running smoothly. Every bill, every coin. He added it to the collection. People kept arriving. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. Some came in from the sidewalk, drawn by the crowd. Others had heard from a friend or neighbor within seconds. What started as a quiet Thursday evening had become a small-town miracle unfolding in real time. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The teen shouted, voice cracking with adrenaline. A woman in hospital scrubs stepped up next. She looked exhausted, like she'd just finished a long shift at Huntington Memorial. She reached into her fanny pack and pulled out a folded $10 bill. "This is for the kids," she said, voice low. "I see them every day. I wish I could give more." Amara took her hand gently. "You just did more than enough." Then from the end of the cereal aisle, a man in a worn army jacket stepped forward. His left leg dragged slightly as he walked. He carried a small plastic bag with a loaf of bread and a can of beans. "Can I give this instead?" he asked, holding out a $5 bill. Amara opened her mouth to say no, but Keanu stepped in first. "Absolutely," he said. The man nodded, folded the bill, and added it to the pile of generosity. 2 minutes, the countdown boy yelled. The store's assistant manager appeared holding 2 large mixing bowls. "We're out of coffee pots," she said with a breathless laugh. Amara nodded. "Use whatever works." The woman placed the bowls down beside the jars, now brimming with change, small bills, and even a few gift cards. She looked around in awe, whispering, "I've never seen anything like this." Across the store, a pair of teenagers approached. One was holding a skateboard. The other had earbuds still hanging around his neck. Neither said much. They just looked at each other, pulled out some crumpled bills from their hoodies, and walked over. "$1 each," one of them muttered, embarrassed. Keanu turned to them with a gentle smile. That $1 might mean everything to someone. The boys grinned awkwardly, then dropped the bills in. "Minute 30, the teen called. A woman holding a grocery bag ran up to the front. She had curly hair, glasses slipping down her nose, and a toddler bouncing on her hip. She placed 2 single dollars on the counter. "I don't have more, but my son just got over leukemia. So, thank you." Amara reached for her hand. The woman's eyes brimmed with tears. Behind her, the crowd shifted. People weren't just watching anymore. They were participating in something larger than themselves. Each donation felt like an act of defiance against despair. 60 seconds, the teen yelled. People clapped. Some laughed. Others cried. A man near the soda cooler shouted, "Let's finish strong." Mr. Dixon opened the emergency fund drawer in his back office. It was for power outages and inventory shortages. He emptied it too. Back at the register, Amara looked at Keanu. "You started something we'll never forget." He just nodded, hands folded in front of him, completely still. 30 seconds! The countdown rang out again. But by now, everyone in the store was counting together. Even those who had already donated were cheering others on, waving them toward the register like it was the finish line of a race. There was no music playing, yet it felt like the whole room was vibrating with rhythm. Not from noise, but from unity. An older gentleman came forward, visibly emotional. He carried an envelope that had clearly been sealed long ago. He whispered to Amara, "This was for my grandson's graduation gift," but he passed before he could walk that stage. She froze. "Sir, you don't have to." He cut her off with a soft smile. "I want Eli to walk that stage instead, someday." He dropped the envelope into the container. It landed with a soft sound, but the weight of it was deafening. 15 seconds. A UPS driver burst through the door, sweating, holding a $50 bill. "Heard what's happening. Am I too late?" "Not if you hurry," someone called out. He sprinted across the store, weaving between carts and people, and tossed the money into the bowl just in time. 10, 9, 8. Amara held her breath. 7, 6. Keanu stayed still. He wasn't watching the bowl. He was watching the people. 5. A woman with gray braids placed a small gold ring into the bowl. 4. A teenager dropped a Polaroid photo, whispering, "This was my brother's favorite store before chemo took him." 3. 2 toddlers waddled up with quarters clutched in tiny hands, their mom behind them clapping with tears in her eyes. 2. Mrs. Sanchez lifted her cane and tapped the jar one more time, her eyes wet but shining. 1. The entire store held still. And then 0. Silence. Then applause. Then laughter. Then crying. But mostly, there was awe. The donation containers overflowed. Not just with money, but with memory, meaning, and something sacred no one could put into words. The act had become more than a challenge. It had become a declaration of who this little community still was, even in a cynical world. Amara wiped her face, overwhelmed. Keanu looked at her, eyes glassy, but kind. "However much that is," he said softly, "multiply it." Mr. Dixon stepped forward, his voice thick. "We'll get an exact count, but I don't think anyone here will forget this night, not ever." The teenager who had done the countdown handed Amara the stopwatch, now frozen at 0. She placed it gently beside the donation jar, like it belonged there forever. In that moment, no one cared who had the most money. No one looked at brands, roles, or status. They had looked at a jar meant for children battling cancer, and they had all said yes. And as the crowd slowly began to settle, no one moved toward the exit, because something had changed, and everyone could feel it. The flurry of emotion hadn't yet settled when Mr. Dixon returned with a clipboard. his fingers trembling slightly as he tallied the final amount from the various makeshift containers now lined up behind the register. He double-checked the sum, then turned toward the crowd and cleared his throat. "Final count," he said. $171.26. Gasps rippled through the group. A few people applauded quietly, surprised they had raised that much in under 5 minutes. Amara blinked back tears, still holding the stopwatch in one hand and a wrinkled $5 bill from earlier in the other. Keanu stepped forward, his expression calm but full of gravity. He took out his phone again, tapped something into his banking app, and then turned the screen toward Mr. Dixon and Amara. The screen displayed a transaction confirmation. Wire transfer, $1,712,600 to Pasadena Children's Care Unit. A beat of silence, then gasps, then someone whispered, "He really did it." And then the room erupted into cheers again. But this time it was different, deeper, more stunned, more reverent. Amara's jaw dropped. She turned toward Keanu, completely overwhelmed. That's $1.7 million. Keanu nodded gently. It felt right. She couldn't respond. Her throat caught as emotion overwhelmed her. Even Mr. Dixon removed his glasses and wiped the fog from them. But just as the moment seemed to settle into awe, a small tug came at the hem of Keanu's jacket. Keanu looked down and saw a little boy bald, wearing a faded superhero t-shirt, his smile crooked but bright, his eyes filled with wonder. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. "That's me on the jar," the boy said, pointing toward the donation container. Keanu knelt without hesitation, getting eye level with the boy. "You're Eli?" The boy nodded proudly. "I didn't know I was famous." Keanu smiled softly. "Well, you are. You've got the whole store talking." Behind the boy stood a tired but radiant woman, his mother. Her hands were clasped in front of her, lips trembling. She didn't speak, just nodded once. When Keanu glanced at her, her eyes said more than words ever could. Eli leaned closer. "Do you know Batman?" Keanu let out a small chuckle. "I've played someone kind of close. John Wick's a little different though." Eli's brow furrowed. "Is he a good guy?" "He tries really hard to be," Keanu replied. That answer seemed to satisfy Eli. He took a deep breath and said, "My doctor says I'm strong, even when it hurts a lot." Keanu reached out and touched Eli's shoulder gently. "I think your doctor's right. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met," the boy beamed. The crowd, which had been silently watching, started gathering closer again. Phones were forgotten, carts abandoned. In that moment, it wasn't about the celebrity in the room. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about a boy, a jar, and a choice that had somehow changed everything. The room had fallen into a warm hush as Eli clutched the edge of Keanu's jacket. People stood still, their hearts caught somewhere between admiration and awe. Keanu didn't rush the moment. He let the silence linger, gave space for Eli's presence to mean something. Mrs. Sanchez, still seated nearby, leaned her cane against the counter and watched with eyes that had seen decades of hardship. She whispered to herself, "The world still has its angels." Amara finally stepped out from behind the register, approaching Eli and his mother. "I didn't know you lived nearby," she said gently. Eli's mom smiled, her eyes glistening. "We come once a week, usually after chemo. He likes the candy aisle." Eli perked up. "They have the purple ones I like." Keanu smiled. "I'm a red licorice guy myself." Laughter spread, small and healing. Keanu looked at Amara and asked quietly, "Can I walk them to the car?" Amara nodded without hesitation. The crowd respectfully parted, creating a path toward the sliding doors. As they passed, people stepped aside in silence. A few offered hugs to the mother. One man handed her a folded 20 and said, "For gas," before disappearing back into the aisles. Outside, the afternoon sun had softened, casting a golden hue over the parking lot. The mother led Eli to an old sedan. The back seat had stuffed animals lining the window. A sticker on the bumper read, "Hope rides with us." Keanu walked slowly beside them. "You're doing an incredible job," he told her, raising him with that kind of courage. She didn't respond right away. Her hands trembled as she opened the door for Eli. "Some days, I don't know how I'm doing it at all. But then I look at him, and I remember. He fights, so I fight." Keanu reached into his pocket and handed her a small black card. It looked simple, with just a number and a name. "If you ever need anything, really anything, call that number. It's a private foundation I support. No red tape." Her lips quivered. She pressed the card to her chest. "I can't accept this." "You already did," Keanu said gently. "Today, you gave everyone here something they didn't know they were missing." Back inside, the store hadn't returned to normal. People were still talking, still shaking their heads in disbelief. Mr. Dixon was organizing the jars. A man with a baseball cap stood by the door, whispering into his phone. "Yeah, Keanu Reeves. Just gave away $1 million like it was nothing." Amara returned to her register, trying to collect herself. Her hands moved robotically, but her heart was racing. She couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. $1 short. That's how it started. And now, a little boy named Eli had just met the man who'd changed his world. The bell over the door jingled again. Keanu walked back in, alone this time. "Did you get your wallet from the car?" Amara asked, the hint of a smile returning to her lips. Keanu chuckled. "Turns out I didn't need it after all." Amara reached for the candy bar and water still sitting behind her register. "On the house this time." Keanu held up his hands. "You sure? Store policy and all." She leaned in slightly. "I think we rewrote the rules today." The store had finally begun to calm. People returned to shopping, but their pace was slower. Their conversations were softer. Something sacred had happened between the aisles, and no one wanted to break it too quickly. Mr. Dixon stood near the front, arms folded, watching Keanu as he walked back toward the candy aisle. His eyes weren't just curious, they were searching for something deeper. He had run this store for over 30 years, and he'd seen his share of characters, but nothing like this. Keanu passed a small end cap of canned goods and paused, fingers resting on the edge of the shelf. There was a quiet in him, a stillness that didn't ask for attention, but commanded it just the same. "Mr. Dixon stepped forward. Mind if I ask you something?" Keanu looked up. "Of course not." "Why?" The older man said simply. "Why did you do all this? Not that I'm complaining, but a man gives away $1 million like it's a handshake. Folks tend to wonder what's behind it." There was no edge in his voice. It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question from a man who had just witnessed something extraordinary and wanted to understand. Keanu nodded slowly and leaned against the metal frame of a shopping cart nearby. His voice dropped, not to be dramatic, but because what he was about to say lived in the quieter parts of his memory. "When I was young," Keanu began, "my little sister Kim got sick. She was only 13 when they found out. Leukemia. Everything changed overnight. School stopped. Vacations stopped. Our world became hospitals and waiting rooms, and the smell of antiseptic. Mr. Dixon didn't say anything. A few nearby shoppers slowed their steps, tuning their ears to the quiet confession unraveling in the front of the store. "We didn't come from money," Keanu continued. "Our mom worked hard, but the treatments were expensive. My acting career hadn't taken off yet. I was doing small things, commercials, background, roles just trying to help." He paused. His eyes weren't tearful, but there was weight in them, a kind of reverence for the pain he was revisiting. "One day, we were at a pharmacy. We had just enough to get Kim's medication, but the card got declined. I remember my mom trying not to cry at the counter, whispering that we'd come back tomorrow." "Mr. Dixon shifted his stance slightly, arms now hanging by his sides. Amara, who had stepped out from her register again, stood a few feet behind them, listening in silence. Keanu smiled faintly. There was a man behind us in line. We didn't know him, never saw him before or after. But he stepped forward, pulled a crumpled bill from his pocket, just a single dollar, and said, "This should cover the rest." The store went still. "That dollar," Keanu said, voice steady now, "wasn't just money. It was a bridge between despair and hope." My mom got the meds. Kim had a few good weeks after that. And that moment never left me. He looked at the overflowing donation jars, the coffee pots filled with change, the cash stuffed into napkin holders and empty bread baskets. I guess today was my chance to give someone else their bridge. Amara stood silently, hand over her chest, eyes locked on Keanu. The teenage boy who had started the countdown earlier had his phone lowered now, forgotten. A mother nearby wiped her cheek discreetly. Even the sound of beeping scanners had gone quiet, as if the entire store had paused in reverence. Mr. Dixon slowly exhaled. That's something else." Keanu nodded. "It's not about the amount. It's about the moment. That man behind us had no idea who we were. He didn't ask. He just helped because he could. That kind of generosity, it changes people." He looked toward the jar again. "That day taught me something I've never forgotten. Sometimes, what seems like a small act, just a dollar, just a word, just a moment of kindness, can ripple out across a life. It might even save it." A young woman approached. She had been standing nearby, holding her toddler in one arm. Her voice was soft, trembling a little. "My nephew's going through chemo right now." That story, it hit me hard. Keanu gave a small, respectful bow of his head. "How's he doing?" "He's 5. Some days are better than others," she replied. "He smiles more when we bring balloons. It's the little things, like you said." Amara stepped closer. "I didn't know about your sister." Keanu's smile was sad, but warm. "She fought harder than anyone I've ever known. She lived with more grace in one day than most people do in a year. And she taught me that love, in action, looks a lot like strangers stepping in when you least expect it." The boy who had been watching from the front window suddenly spoke. "Is that why you were so calm when I told you you couldn't pay for the bar?" Keanu looked at him, and there was a sparkle in his eye. "Maybe. Or maybe I knew something better was coming." Laughter rippled through the group, not loud, not jarring, just gentle relief, releasing from everyone's chest at once. "Mr. Dixon walked toward the donation area, where the makeshift containers had been moved onto a table for counting. He looked back at Keanu. "So, all of this was because someone gave you $1? Keanu stepped forward, stood beside him, and looked down at the mountain of bills and coins. "That dollar gave me time, gave my sister hope. And today, maybe we've just given someone else the same gift." Mr. Dixon reached into his back pocket and pulled out a faded receipt. He scribbled something on the back with a pen from the counter, then placed it on top of the cash pile. Keanu glanced at it, then smiled. "What'd you write?" Amara asked. Mr. Dixon shrugged. "Just wanted to be the next ripple." Keanu looked around the store, now brimming with silence and emotion again. That's the beautiful thing about these moments. They never end where they begin. One act, then another, until you've changed something far bigger than yourself. A woman stepped forward from the pharmacy aisle. "I work at the hospital Eli goes to. I'll make sure this donation gets to the right place." Keanu gave a small nod. "Thank you." Another man added, "My brother's a nurse on that floor. He's going to lose his mind when he hears about this." Keanu smiled softly. "Then let's give him a story worth telling." The next morning, the sun had barely cleared the rooftops when the news vans began to roll up. KTLA was the first on the scene. Their crew parked just outside Dixon's Market, unloading cameras, tripods, and microphone kits in a flurry of excitement. Reporters spoke in hushed tones, not wanting to disturb what still felt like sacred ground. The store hadn't even opened yet, but a small crowd had already gathered on the sidewalk. Neighbors, nurses, curious onlookers, and parents with children who had heard about the donation jar and wanted to add something of their own. Amara arrived early, unlocking the store's front door, only to be greeted by a camera pointed directly at her face. "Excuse me," the reporter said politely. "Are you the young woman who helped organize the donation yesterday?" Amara blinked in surprise. Well, I didn't organize it. It just happened. Keanu made it happen." The reporter smiled. "Still, you were right there in the center of it. We'd love to get your thoughts." A few minutes later, Amara stood in front of the store, mic clipped to her collar, trying not to fidget. The anchor asked her to walk through what happened, from the moment Keanu asked about the jar to the final countdown. As she spoke, her voice started to tremble not from nerves, but from emotion. "I see people every day, some in a rush, some just kind. But yesterday, I saw something else. It wasn't just about money. It was about what happens when strangers decide to care." Inside the store, Mr. Dixon adjusted the blinds as he watched the growing commotion. Keanu had returned early too, but he stayed in the back room, far from the cameras. He was sipping coffee quietly, watching from a security monitor instead of stepping into the spotlight. When one of the reporters asked to speak with him, Amara gently shook her head. He said no interviews. He wants the story to be about the kids, about Eli, about the people who gave. Another news van pulled up, this time from ABC7. By noon, 3 different local stations had set up outside, their anchors repeating variations of the same headline. Keanu Reeves' $1 memory sparks $1 million moment. Photos of the overflowing jars, of Lorraine Sanchez dropping her coin purse, and of Keanu kneeling beside Eli circulated across every news feed. One image, in particular, went viral. It showed Keanu holding the jar just as coins spilled over the top, with a small hand Eli's gripping his sleeve. The caption read, "Heroes don't always wear capes." By late afternoon, it had spread to Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The hashtag number #Keanu'sDollar began trending nationally. Someone posted a video of the moment Keanu made his offer. "If anyone in this store donates in the next 5 minutes, I'll multiply the total by 10,000, and people couldn't stop sharing it. One clip reached over 1 million views in 3 hours. Celebrities retweeted it. Doctors commented on it. Parents shared their own stories of sick children and moments of unexpected kindness. Despite the viral storm, Keanu remained quiet. When Amara approached him again and said the producers from Good Morning America wanted a quote, he shook his head softly. "Let the kids be the story," he said. "Let the love they received be the headline. I'm just the echo." The buzz didn't stop at local news. National outlets picked up the story by evening. CNN's headline read, "A grocery jar, a movie star, and $1.7 million in hope." USA Today ran a piece titled, "Keanu Reeves quietly changes a boy's life." Late-night hosts mentioned it in their monologues. Talk shows debated whether generosity could ripple across communities if people followed Keanu's example. But through it all, one thing remained constant. Keanu refused to appear on camera. His silence spoke louder than any statement. Mr. Dixon, meanwhile, had never seen his humble grocery store filled with so many reporters. He stood near the register, watching news anchors set up shots near the checkout lanes and the now iconic donation jar, which sat proudly in the same spot where it had all started. It was clean, polished, and now filled with handwritten notes, flowers, and little drawings from local children. One of those drawings was from Eli, a crayon picture of a stick figure with black hair and a superhero cape holding a giant heart. Next to it he had written, "Thank you for saving me." Dixon finally gave in to one reporter's request and stepped in front of the camera. "You want to know who Keanu is?" he said, adjusting his cap. "He's the guy who didn't want his name on the check, who waited in the back while strangers cried, who gave every person here the feeling they mattered." When asked what he thought would happen next, Dixon shrugged. "I think a lot more people are going to look at donation jars differently now." Back behind the scenes, Keanu continued to avoid the chaos. He sat in the break room with a paperback book in hand and his phone turned face down. Every few minutes, someone would knock politely and ask if he was ready to talk. Each time, Amara answered for him. "He's good. He's here. That's enough." Meanwhile, the social media explosion only intensified. Celebrities like Dwayne Johnson and Jennifer Garner posted about it. One pediatric nurse from the children's hospital where Eli was being treated wrote, "I've watched this boy fight for his life. This money won't just help him. It will help so many more like him. What Keanu did, it's not just generous, it's rare." The video of the countdown 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 had now been viewed over 15 million times. Even late-night orders to Dixon's Market increased. Strangers from other states called the store asking if they could donate. One man from Ohio said, "I don't need groceries, I just want to give." An online fundraiser was launched by a local PTA member who had witnessed the event. Within 24 hours, it had raised an additional $300,000, with the note, "In honor of Eli and every child fighting a battle we can't see." At one point, Amara found Keanu in the quietest aisle of the store between the paper towels and the dog food. "They want to give you an award," she said softly. He looked up, brow furrowed. "Who?" "A city council member and the mayor. They want to name this donation drive after you." Keanu smiled, then shook his head. "Call it Eli's Jar, or Lorraine's Coin, or the 5-Minute Miracle. Anything but my name." Then he added, "The moment people start clapping for me is the moment they forget who this was for." The house was quiet when Amara opened the front door. The porch light cast a soft glow on the faded welcome mat, and the faint hum of a ceiling fan could be heard from inside. She slipped her shoes off gently and stepped into the living room, still carrying the weight of everything that had just happened. Her mother, Darlene, was sitting on the couch with a folded blanket over her lap, reading glasses perched on her nose, and a crossword puzzle book in hand. She looked up when she heard the door. "You're home late, sweetheart," she said, voice tender but concerned. "Everything okay at the store?" Amara didn't answer right away. She walked over, dropped her bag on the floor beside the couch, and knelt in front of her mom. Darlene noticed her trembling hands. "Amara, baby, what is it? Did something happen?" Amara shook her head, a soft smile starting to form. "No, Mom. Something beautiful happened." Before Darlene could ask more, the pitter-patter of feet echoed down the hallway. Tyson, Amara's 10-year-old brother, peeked his head out from behind the kitchen doorway. His eyes were wide with curiosity. He was still in his pajamas, his hair messy from sleep. "Hey," he said softly. "Did I miss anything cool?" Amara looked at him and smiled. "You missed the most incredible thing I've ever seen." Tyson padded over and plopped down beside their mother. He wrapped his arms around Amara's shoulder and rested his chin on her arm. "What happened?" he asked. Amara took a deep breath. "You remember the donation jar at the front of the store? The one for the hospital kids?" Tyson nodded. "I dropped in my allowance last week. Well, tonight," she said, her voice thickening with emotion, "something amazing happened. Keanu Reeves came in." Tyson's eyes widened. "No way!" Darlene's brow furrowed. "The actor?" Amara nodded. "He was just walking around the store like anyone else. No cameras, no bodyguards. He didn't even say who he was at first. But then, he saw the donation jar, and everything changed." Darlene set her crossword puzzle down. Changed how? Amara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. He asked how much was in the jar. I told him maybe $30. Then he pulled out his phone, asked for the hospital unit's name, and said if anyone donated in the next 5 minutes, he'd multiply the total by 10,000. Darlene's hand flew to her mouth. Tyson's eyes lit up. "What? He did that?" People rushed back in, emptied their wallets. Even Mrs. Kim from the flower shop ran in with her savings. The jar couldn't hold it all. They started filling coffee pots and salad containers. Tyson leaned forward, completely captivated. "How much did they raise?" "About $170. "That's it?" Amara grinned. "Keanu transferred over $1.7 million to the hospital." Darlene let out a gasp. Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't say anything, just reached out and held Amara's hands tightly. Tyson's mouth hung open for a moment. Then he whispered, "He saved kids like me?" Amara looked him in the eyes. "Yes, baby. He saved kids just like you. Tyson turned his face into her shoulder, his small arms hugging her tightly. "He helped all of us," she whispered into his hair, "in more ways than he'll ever know." Darlene sat in stunned silence for a long moment, as though trying to process the weight of it all. Her fingers slowly traced the edge of the couch cushion, then reached for the framed photo on the end table. Tyson's first day back home from the hospital. Bald, fragile, but grinning wide, with a superhero cape Amara had sewn from a pillowcase. She held the photo to her chest. "And he didn't want the credit?" Amara shook her head. "He wouldn't even take a selfie. The reporters begged him to speak. He just said, 'Let the kids be the story.' Then he walked away like nothing happened." Darlene's voice cracked. God bless that man. They sat there quietly, the only sound the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. Tyson finally pulled away and looked up at them, his voice thoughtful. "Do you think he knows how much that means? To kids like me?" Amara wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "Maybe not exactly, but I think he understands more than most." He looked at Eli like he really saw him, she added. Not like someone sick or weak, just brave. Tyson stared at the floor, then whispered, "I want to be like that when I grow up. I want to help people." Darlene smiled through her tears. "You already are, sweetheart." Amara leaned her head back against the couch. "It made me think about all those months in the hospital, when we had to choose between dinner and gas, when we relied on donation bins and strangers. And now, to see people pour in every last coin just because one man believed in them." She trailed off, wiping her eyes. Darlene looked at her daughter and said softly, "You always hoped the world was good. Tonight, you were proven right." Tyson stood up and walked to the window, peeking through the blinds into the quiet neighborhood. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. "Do you think people will keep giving now, even without the money?" he asked. Amara joined him at the window. "I think they will. I think something shifted tonight." He turned and smiled. "I'm going to put my allowance back in the jar, just in case." Darlene chuckled through her tears. "There's no jar at home, honey." Tyson ran to his room, then came back carrying a mason jar with a piece of masking tape on it. Scrawled in blue marker were the words, "For someone else. I've been saving this since last year," he said proudly. "I didn't know who it was for until now." Amara took the jar gently and kissed his forehead. "You're amazing," he grinned. "Tell Keanu Reeves he can be Batman now." Amara laughed, and for the first time in a while, it wasn't from nervous energy or exhaustion. It was real. They stayed up for a little while longer, just the three of them, sharing stories and memories. Tyson eventually fell asleep with his head on Amara's lap, and Darlene tucked a blanket over both of them. In the silence of their home, after so many storms, there was peace. And in that peace, there was hope sparked not just by a celebrity, but by a community that had rediscovered its heart. And a girl who had always believed people were capable of more. Sunlight poured through the window of the modest apartment, spilling over the floor where Tyson's jar still sat near the TV stand. Morning had arrived, but the house didn't wake to an alarm clock. It woke to a soft knock on the door. Amara, still wrapped in a blanket from the couch, blinked herself awake. She looked down to see Tyson sleeping peacefully beside her, curled up with a stuffed bear tucked under one arm. Darlene, already in the kitchen making tea, peeked around the corner and smiled. "Someone's at the door," she said quietly. Amara rubbed her eyes and shuffled to the door, opening it to find a delivery woman in a navy uniform holding a small stack of envelopes and a white padded envelope with a gold sticker on the back. "Delivery for Amara James," the woman said with a gentle smile. Amara signed for the items and thanked her before slowly closing the door again. She flipped through the stack. 2 envelopes were standard mail, but the padded one stood out. The sticker bore a single printed name, K. Reeves. Her breath caught for a second. She sat down, carefully peeled the seal open, and slid out the contents. A folded note on heavy cream paper and a single sheet beneath it. She read the note aloud, her voice trembling just enough to betray the storm of emotion beneath. "Dear Amara, Thank you for believing that one small act can matter. Enclosed is the confirmation of payment for your brother's remaining medical expenses at Valley Children's. Consider it a quiet thank you for being brave, for standing firm, and for reminding me that humanity still lives in the corners of our world, even when we're not looking. A dollar with a purpose is never small. Keanu. Her fingers gently traced the signature. Below the letter was an official hospital receipt marked "Paid in Full" with the balance line reading 0. She let out a soft sound, half laugh and half sob, then pressed the papers to her chest. Darlene moved closer, reading over her shoulder. When she saw the words, her hand flew to her mouth. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she pulled Amara into a tight embrace. "I don't believe it," she whispered. Tyson stirred on the couch, still half asleep. "What happened?" Amara turned toward him, her voice catching in her throat. "Keanu paid off the rest of your medical bills. Thank you." His eyes widened, still foggy with sleep. "All of them?" Amara nodded. "All of them." He sat up, rubbing his face in disbelief. "So we're free?" Darlene sat on the edge of the couch, nodding slowly. "Yes, baby, we're free." The three of them sat there for a moment, huddled together, the weight of years lifting in an instant. No more collectors, no more late notices, no more trade-offs between medicine and groceries, just freedom. And it hadn't come with a press conference. No camera crew, just a note, a payment, and a message they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. Across town, meanwhile, Dixon's Market opened its doors to an entirely different kind of crowd. What had once been a sleepy corner store was now buzzing. Customers weren't just buying groceries. They were walking in with envelopes, jars, coins, and even handmade cards. Mr. 10. Dixon stood near the new installation on the wall, which his employees had worked on overnight. A large board of polished pine stretched across the front wall near the registers, framed with metal brackets. At the top was a carved sign, "The Dollar Wall." One by one, people began pinning dollars to the wall. Some folded their bills into hearts. Others wrote messages in marker directly onto the money short. Powerful words like "For Eli," "For Tyson," or simply "Hope." A young woman who'd seen the story online had driven over from Riverside with her toddler. She placed a single crisp dollar bill on the wall with shaking hands. "My niece was treated at Valley Children's last year," she told Mr. Dixon. "We never got to say thank you. This is our thank you." The wall filled faster than anyone expected. By noon, Dixon's staff had to bring out a second board. A retired Marine walked in and saluted the photo of Eli still hanging near the register. Without saying a word, he tucked a $100 bill into the jar beside it and turned away. The local newspaper showed up with a photographer, snapping photos of the growing memorial of generosity. They interviewed customers, staff, even kids who came with piggy banks. Everyone had their own reason. Everyone had someone they loved, or lost, or still prayed for. Then Valley Children's Hospital released a statement on its social media channels. "In the last 24 hours, we've received more than 3,700 individual donations, our highest total ever for a single day." The story of Dixon's Market and the extraordinary kindness of a silent donor has inspired an entire state, and we are forever grateful. Lives will be saved, families will be helped, children will have a chance because of all of you. Underneath, hashtags flooded the page. Number Keanu's Dollar. Number Hope in a Store. Number One Small Act. Keanu's team, when reached for comment by major networks, issued a single sentence. Mr. Reeves declines interviews at this time. He asks that the focus remain on the children and the cause. The testable setter, restraint only fueled the wave of admiration. Commentators on morning shows praised his humility. Parents on social media wrote essays about what that donation meant to their own struggles. Even celebrities started posting matching donation screenshots in solidarity. And back in the quiet living room where it all began, Amara placed Keanu's letter inside a simple frame and hung it on the wall next to Tyson's end-of-treatment certificate. One marked a battle survived, the other marked the compassion that helped carry them through it. Darlene passed her a cup of tea and rested a hand on her shoulder. "I hope he knows," she said softly, "just how much this meant." Amara smiled through glassy eyes. "I think he does, but I also think he didn't do it for the thank you." Tyson was already drawing again. This time, it wasn't a hospital or a hero in a cape. It was a simple man in a black jacket kneeling next to a little boy, a bright red dollar bill in his hand, and a jar labeled Hope. In the corner of the page, Tyson wrote a title in big block letters: "The Man Who Saved Us." The request came from a local morning news show. It wasn't national, not yet just a Fresno-based broadcast called Good Day Valley. A reporter named Candace Tran had seen the video of the donation jar, the growing wall of dollars at Dixon's Market, and the photo of little Eli, with Keanu Reeves kneeling beside him. The story had quietly exploded across social media. Still, it wasn't the celebrity part that moved Candace. It was Amara. Candace emailed the store first. Mr. Dixon forwarded it to Amara with a simple note: "They'd like to hear your voice. I think the world should." At first, Amara hesitated. She didn't feel like someone who belonged on camera. She wasn't famous, and she wasn't looking to be. But her mom encouraged her. So did Tyson. He looked up from his cereal bowl and said, "You're already famous here." So on a breezy Tuesday morning, Amara stepped into the modest studio. She wore a soft yellow sweater, her hair pulled back simply. No makeup crew, no rehearsed lines, just her, sitting on a couch next to Candace, heart pounding in her chest. The lights came on. Candace smiled warmly. "We're here today with Amara Sanchez," she began. "A young woman whose simple act of kindness helped spark a wave of generosity, healing, and hope. Amara, thank you for joining us." Amara nodded. "Thanks for having me." Candace leaned in. "Can you tell us what went through your mind the moment you saw Keanu Reeves walk into your store?" Amara chuckled softly. "Honestly, I thought I was hallucinating. I mean, what are the odds, right? But once he asked about the jar, everything shifted." She shared the story of that day. The strangers who gave, the old woman with the cane, the UPS driver, and finally, the moment the little boy tugged on Keanu's sleeve and said, "That's me" on the jar. Candace nodded along, but then asked gently, "You never knew what would happen. You just hoped people would help. What made you care so deeply in the first place?" Amara took a deep breath. "My brother, Tyson," she said. "He's 8 now. But when he was 5, he had leukemia. We didn't have much, but people came through. Neighbors, teachers. Even one woman who barely knew us gave us her last $5 for gas to the hospital. I've never forgotten that. I guess I just wanted to do the same for someone else." Candace let the silence sit for a moment before asking, "And what do you want people watching right now to understand?" Amara didn't hesitate. "You don't have to be rich to matter. You don't have to have millions to make a difference. You just have to care." The interview ended 5 minutes later, but by the time Amara got home, her phone had already started buzzing. Her mom opened the door with tearful eyes. "You were wonderful," she whispered, pulling Amara into a long hug. Within hours, the segment had been clipped and shared online. Keanu's name helped boost the reach, of course. But it was Amara's voice, clear, humble, firm, that people replayed again and again. One viewer wrote, "This young woman just gave my heart a reason to believe again." Another said, "Forget the money. Her words are the real gift." By the end of the day, the clip had reached 1 million views. But something even more powerful began happening offline. An ethics teacher in Sacramento emailed the station asking for permission to show the segment to her class. Then a principal in San Diego added it to a middle school leadership assembly. By Friday, schools across California and then across the country were using Amara's words in lesson plans titled "Every Dollar Matters" and "Kindness is Contagious." Even Keanu's quiet line, "A dollar with a purpose is never small," was printed across classroom bulletin boards beside photos of Eli's smile and Amara's yellow sweater. Letters began to arrive at Dixon's Market, handwritten in pencil and roof, colored in crayon. One came from a fourth grader in Nebraska. It read, "Dear Amara, I'm saving my allowance to start a kindness jar at my school. I want to help someone the way you helped Eli. Thank you for showing us how." Another in shaky cursive from an elderly woman in Maine. "My husband and I watched your interview with tears in our eyes. We lost our son to cancer 30 years ago. We sent a check for the hospital in his memory. Bless you, dear girl." Amara tried to respond to everyone. Sometimes she wrote back late into the night, her fingers cramping, her eyes sore, but her heart completely full. One morning, she opened an envelope addressed simply to Amara, California. No street, no zip code. Somehow, it found her. Inside was a folded piece of hotel stationery. It had just one sentence, written in neat, all capital letters. "The world needs more of you. Keep going." K.R. Amara blinked. Her hands trembled. She tucked the letter into her journal and didn't tell anyone, not even her mom. Some things, she felt, were meant to live quietly in the heart. Meanwhile, the dollar wall at Dixon's grew by the hour. Tourists driving through made detours just to stop in and add their dollar to the collection. Many of them paused to take photos beside the growing collage of bills and messages, but most simply left a note. One woman wrote, "For my sister, who beat cancer, thank you for helping someone else's." Even local radio stations got involved, calling it the Dollar Revolution. Some stations encouraged listeners to start their own versions. Community centers, barber shops, school cafeterias, everyday people began taping up dollar bills with scribbled names and hearts across the nation. Amara's quiet message had sparked more than a fundraiser. It was a movement. But she still refused to take credit. "It wasn't me," she told a friend. "It was just everyone deciding to care at the same time." She said it like it was simple. But people knew it wasn't. That's why they kept listening. The sky over Fresno was soft and overcast the morning Keanu and Amara arrived at Valley Children's Hospital. A quiet breeze stirred the flags out front. The hospital staff had been preparing since dawn. But despite the whispers and excitement, there were no red carpets, no photographers, and no news vans. Just a modest entrance, a hand-painted sign from the kids that read, "Thank you, Keanu and Amara," and a group of nurses smiling warmly behind their masks. Keanu wore a simple, dark jacket and jeans. Amara had braided her hair, her nervous fingers tugging gently at the ends as she walked beside him. They hadn't spoken much on the ride over. Keanu had driven himself, showing up in a beat-up Ford pickup, not a limo. That's how he preferred it. Inside the main lobby, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and crayons. Walls were lined with colorful art by children past and present. A small crowd gathered doctors, custodians, administrative staff, and a few families who had been given permission to stay briefly for the arrival. Then Eli appeared, holding something behind his back. He was wearing red sneakers and a hospital bracelet, but his energy lit up the room. When he spotted Keanu, he didn't hesitate. He ran right up to him, eyes wide with a mix of awe and confidence, and said, "I made you something." Keanu knelt. "Yeah? What is it?" Eli pulled out a folded piece of thick paper. He opened it with both hands to reveal a hand-drawn cape, cut from construction paper, with a big letter K in the center. It was colored bright blue and had stars all over it. "This is your superhero cape," Eli said. "You saved a lot of kids." Keanu smiled so softly it almost looked like sadness. He reached out and took the cape like it was made of gold. "Thanks, buddy," he said. "But I think you're the real superhero here." "Nope," Eli grinned. "I'm your sidekick." The crowd laughed. One of the nurses wiped her eye with a sleeve. Keanu stood and turned to the head nurse, an older woman named Jeanette who had worked at Valley Children's for over 3 decades. He extended a hand, but then pulled her into a quiet, gentle hug. "Thank you," he whispered into her ear. "You're the real heroes. All of you." Jeanette smiled, but her lips quivered. "You have no idea what this means to us," she whispered back. From there, they were given a quiet tour. No fanfare, just room after room filled with hope, fear, laughter, and recovery. Keanu stopped in the art therapy room, admiring the finger paintings. Amara lingered near the hallway, with framed portraits of children and their families. Each face held a story. Then came the moment no one expected. In the East Wing, a team of hospital executives stood beneath a large white sheet taped over a glass wall. As Keanu and Amara approached, a doctor gave a small nod, and 2 nurses pulled the sheet away. Underneath was a gleaming plaque. Bronze letters carved into the wall read, "The Reeves Care Center, a healing space, built on kindness." Keanu stared at the words for a long moment. His jaw clenched slightly, and his hands fell into his pockets. "I didn't ask for that," he said softly. The hospital director smiled. "You didn't have to." The announcement of the Reeves Care Center wasn't just symbolic, it was already making a difference. Within the newly named wing, children were being prepped for specialized treatment protocols, some developed only months prior. The funding that had poured in after Keanu's anonymous donation and Amara's viral interview had been channeled to accelerate life-saving care. Amara walked beside a wall of painted butterflies. Each one carried the initials of a child in remission. She reached out and touched a purple one labeled TS. The date below it was recent, just 2 months ago. The moment took her breath. "That's Tyson," she whispered. Her knees bent instinctively as she crouched to read it again. Her eyes filled with tears. Not because she didn't know he'd survived, but because somehow, seeing it here among all the others made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. Keanu knelt beside her. "He belongs here," he said gently. Amara nodded, wiping her face. "All those nights I stayed awake, wondering if we'd make it. All those mornings my mom had to pretend she was okay." She sniffled. "And now, he's on a wall with butterflies." They stood in silence for a moment. Then one of the doctors called them into the adjacent therapy room. Inside, children were laughing over a pile of Legos. A boy in a wheelchair told a joke that made 2 girls double over. A therapy dog named Scout wagged his tail as a toddler tried to put sunglasses on him. The energy was so different from the sterile, nervous air Amara had expected. Here, it felt like life. A volunteer handed Amara a white envelope. She opened it to find a handwritten thank you letter from one of the patients, a 12-year-old named Natalie who had seen Amara's interview on her hospital tablet. Her letter said, "You made me feel like my voice matters too. When I grow up, I want to help people the way you helped us. I'm going to start with a lemonade stand next week." Amara clutched the letter to her chest. "I didn't do this alone," she said to Keanu. He smiled. "No one ever does." Just then, Eli ran into the room again, holding a new drawing. "I drew the care center," he exclaimed. He held it up proudly. There was a stick figure labeled Mr. K, another labeled Miss A, and a building with hearts for windows. Over the door, in bright red crayon, it read, "Where Heroes Heal." Keanu looked at Amara. "You ready for this next part?" She nodded. "Let's show them what kindness can really do." As they exited the therapy room, a nurse stopped them at the doorway. She handed Keanu a framed photo. It was from years ago, his sister Kim, bald from chemo, smiling in a hospital gown beside a young nurse. "She inspired so many," the nurse said softly. "We kept this for years, hoping we could one day say thank you." Keanu swallowed hard, his voice low. She would have loved this place. He hung the photo on the new wall, beside the words etched in gold. "Every act of kindness echoes forever." And with that, the past and present finally met. The morning sun filtered through the windows of a small off-campus apartment in Westwood. The sounds of early traffic outside, distant laughter from students headed to class, and the aroma of instant coffee filled the room. Amara stood by the mirror, tying back her curls into a ponytail. Her faded UCLA nursing sweatshirt had a small coffee stain on the sleeve, but she didn't care. She had clinical rounds in 30 minutes, and her focus was locked in. On the desk beside her, nursing textbooks lay open, dog-eared and highlighted. A stethoscope rested on a folded pair of blue scrubs. Beneath it, a framed photo of her, Tyson, and their mom smiled up at her. The photo was taken last Christmas, their first holiday together without the constant shadow of fear. Tyson had been in remission for 6 months. Amara checked the time and grabbed her messenger bag. She kissed her fingers and touched the photo lightly. "You're why I'm doing this," she whispered. The ride to the hospital training site was quiet. On the metro, a little girl across the aisle clutched a doll with a mask over its face. Her mother sat beside her, reading a pamphlet about chemotherapy side effects. Amara smiled gently. She understood that world. She'd lived in it. Now she was stepping into the other side, where she could be the one offering hope. As she walked through the hospital's sliding doors, the familiar hum of machines, the squeak of nurses' sneakers, and the gentle beeping of monitors greeted her. Amara adjusted her badge and headed for the pediatric oncology wing. It still sent a chill through her, not because of fear, but because of memory. Every step down that hallway reminded her of Tyson. The nights she sat by his bed. The mornings they celebrated tiny victories like a white blood cell count going up or a fever breaking. The strangers who offered warm meals. And the man who had walked into Dixon's Market and changed everything. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her mom. "Big envelope came for you, from Beverly Hills. Want me to open it?" Amara blinked. "Beverly Hills?" She replied, "No, I'll open it when I get home." The rest of the day was a blur of rotations. She shadowed a nurse during intake of a new patient, a 7-year-old boy named Carter, newly diagnosed with leukemia. His father couldn't stop pacing. His mother sat frozen. Amara crouched down, gave Carter a fist bump, and told him a secret. "You're stronger than you know. You've already made it through the scariest part, hearing the news." By evening, Amara returned to her apartment, her legs sore, but her heart full. She kicked off her sneakers, dropped her bag, and saw the large cream-colored envelope on the kitchen table. Her mom had placed it under a small note. "Looks important. No return address." Amara sat down slowly and turned the envelope over in her hands. The seal was simple, her name written in clean cursive. Amara Sanchez. She opened it. Inside was a smaller envelope. And inside that, something strange. A grocery receipt. Just 3 items. Milk, bread, peanut butter. Total, $8.23. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, paid in full. K. Amara's breath caught. She looked again, just to be sure. And then she saw what else was inside. A crisp $1 bill, signed, and one short note, written in blue ink on cream stationery. "You reminded me that doing the right thing is never small." Amara held the dollar bill between her fingers like it was made of glass. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable, just a simple K. No last name, no flourish. Just enough. She leaned back in her chair, eyes welling. In all the months since that day at Dixon's Market, she had tried to make sense of it. The news, the attention, the sudden rush of donations, her family's sudden peace. And now this one simple envelope that seemed to carry the weight of everything that had changed. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from her friend Maya, who was also in nursing school. "Girl, did you see the new article? Dollar with Dignity hit 23 million in donations. 23. Nationwide." Amara stared at the screen, then turned it face down. She didn't need headlines right now. She needed silence. She went to the bookshelf, where she kept the small memory box she'd made after Tyson finished chemo. She opened it and placed the signed dollar bill inside, next to his hospital bracelet, one of his drawings, and a dried-out flower he'd once picked for her on the way to an appointment. This dollar belonged there. It was a symbol now, not of money, but of what a gesture could do when it came from the right place. A year ago, she had been a cashier in a corner store, counting coins and calculating whether they'd have enough for rent and groceries. Now, she was wearing scrubs, helping families like hers, walking hospital corridors with purpose. And the world had changed around her, all because one man chose not to ignore a jar. She sat down on her bed and looked across the room at her vision board. It still had Tyson's picture at the center, surrounded by quotes she scribbled from time to time. One in bold marker read, "We don't have to be rich to matter. We just have to care." It was the line she had said in that TV interview that went viral. She hadn't planned it. The words just came out. And now they were being quoted in classrooms, printed on school posters, and even showed up on a billboard she passed on the freeway once. She shook her head, not out of disbelief, but out of humility. The idea that something so big could come from something so small, it was humbling. And now this gift from Keanu, this receipt, this dollar, it was a closing loop, a full circle. A quiet thank you from someone who never asked for credit, never gave another interview, never let the cameras follow him. He had slipped the world a lesson, not for attention, but because it was right. And now, Amara would carry it forward. In every patient she comforted, every child she held a hand for, every family she offered peace to. She didn't need to tell the world what he gave her. She would show them. Amara stood in front of the old register at Dixon's Market. The store had remodeled a little over the past year, with cleaner aisles and a brighter layout. But that her register, was still in the same place. And above it, laminated in a small plastic frame, hung a faded piece of paper. It read, "Dollar rule, never ignore the smallest bill. It might carry the biggest heart." Customers still asked about it sometimes. Some laughed, thinking it was a joke. But others would pause. They'd run their fingers over it. They'd smile in a quiet way, like maybe they understood the weight it carried. Amara touched the edge of the frame gently, remembering the moment it all began. The dollar, the man, the silence, and the ripple that followed. So much had changed since that day. Tyson was back to running around the house, laughing more than ever. Her mom had picked up a part-time job again, not out of desperation, but because she wanted to feel useful. And Amara herself? She was learning how to hold a stethoscope and comfort crying parents. She was learning to fight for healing in small ways, one patient at a time. But the truth was, the biggest lesson hadn't come from school. It had come from watching a quiet man with kind eyes place a dollar bill in a plastic jar without saying a word. That gesture had become her compass. Sometimes people imagine that heroes wear capes or shout loud from podiums. But the real ones, she'd learned, often whisper instead of roar. They act when no one is looking. They don't wait for applause. And they believe that something as simple as kindness can carry further than any spotlight ever could. She used to wonder if she mattered. Just a cashier in a store with sticky floors and flickering lights. But now she knew better. She had learned that dignity doesn't come from fame or fortune. It comes from intention, from doing something meaningful when it would be easier to walk away. She turned away from the register and looked around the store. Mr. Dixon was still there, stocking cans on the bottom shelf. A little grayer maybe, but just as warm. The donation jar was now a permanent fixture renamed the Hope Fund. And every few weeks, someone new dropped in $1 with a note or a prayer. Some even left coins with hand-drawn hearts. The wall behind the counter now held photos of children who had been helped. Some were smiling from hospital beds. Others were snapshots from home, playing with siblings or hugging their moms. This place wasn't just a store anymore. It had become a spark. And she thought about that often, how one moment, one choice, one human act could echo further than any of them imagined. If someone had told her back then that a single dollar would lead to $23 million, she would have laughed. But now, she wouldn't even blink. Because she had seen what one good deed could do when passed hand to hand. Amara still kept the signed dollar bill in a small shadow box at home, next to the framed receipt. $8.23, paid in full. It sat on her dresser like a quiet anchor. On tough days, when clinicals overwhelmed her, or when she doubted her path, she'd glance at it and breathe in the memory. She remembered Keanu's words. "You reminded me that doing the right thing is never small." It stayed with her. Sometimes, the media still reached out. They wanted updates, interviews, another headline. But Amara had learned something else from Keanu's silence could be just as powerful as speaking. so she chose when to speak. And when she did, it was always with care. Like the morning she visited her old high school and gave a short talk to the seniors, she didn't mention the celebrity. She didn't even bring up the viral moment until the end. Instead, she spoke about integrity, about paying attention, about choosing to see people, even when the world told you to look away. And when she finished, she simply said, "You don't have to be rich to matter. You just have to care." The room was silent. Some students looked down at their desks. A few wiped their eyes. And she left knowing that even if just one of them carried that message into their future, the ripple would continue. That ripple had already gone places she could never have imagined. Teachers had written to her saying they now used her story to teach empathy. Small businesses across the country had started Dollar with Dignity campaigns. One bakery in North Carolina gave every customer a free cookie if they donated $1 to the local children's hospital. A bookstore in Wisconsin renamed their donation shelf Keanu's Kindness Corner. But Amara never let it go to her head, because at its core, none of this had started with her. It had started with someone else's act of generosity. And then, her choice to respond to it. That's what made the story special. Not celebrity, not money, but courage and humility colliding in one unexpected moment behind a dusty old register. She smiled softly, remembering Tyson's voice the night it all happened. He saved kids like me? Yes, he had. But more than that, he'd reminded the world that kindness wasn't extinct, that compassion hadn't gone out of style, and that even in a world where everything seemed to chase viral fame, there was still room for anonymous grace. She walked toward the back door of the market, pausing one last time at the framed dollar rule. A woman noticed her standing there. "Hey," the woman said, "are you the girl from the story?" Amara nodded gently. The woman reached into her wallet and pulled out $1. She didn't say anything, just dropped it in the jar, smiled, and walked away. Amara blinked back tears, because in that quiet moment, she knew the ripple wasn't done yet.